What if I told you the worst thing that ever happened to you might secretly be the best? That the loss you're crying over today could be the very thing that saves your life tomorrow? Sounds impossible, doesn't it? But deep in a quiet village, there lived an old man. He wasn't wealthy, didn't own gold, land, or anything flashy. But what he did have was a horse. Not just any horse. A stunning, powerful white horse that everyone in the village admired. People came from far and wide, offering him rich as bags of coins, land, everything. But the old man always said no. This horse isn't just an animal, he'd say, smiling gently. He's my friend, my family. To others, that sounded ridiculous. They mocked him. Why live in poverty when you could sell the horse and be rich? But the old man always gave the same calm answer. Money can buy many things, but not peace. And then just when everything seemed still and ordinary, something happened that changed everything. In the eyes of the villagers, the old man's decision made no sense. He lived in a small wooden house, wore the same faded clothes year after year, and worked just enough to survive. Meanwhile, tied to the wooden post outside his home stood a horse that could have changed everything. People whispered behind his back. He's a fool, they'd say. Doesn't he realize what that horse is worth? Even his closest neighbors would try to reason with him. You're getting older, sell the horse, build a better house, live comfortably for once. But each time, the old man would smile, unbothered. You think peace comes from comfort? He'd reply softly. But I've seen people with more than I could dream of. Their hearts are full of storms. To him, the horse wasn't a possession. It was a companion, a soul that had shared his silence, his struggles, and his solitude. Something a bag of coins could ever replace. But deep down, the villagers didn't just see a missed opportunity. They saw weakness. A man clinging to sentiment when he could have chosen success. And then came the day that changed everything. It was early morning when the whispers began. A neighbor passed by the old man's home and froze. The post outside was empty, the white horse gone. Word spread like wildfire. Soon, half the village had gathered. Outside the old man's gate, shaking their heads, arms crossed, eyes full of pity or judgment. One man stepped forward. Now look what's happened. You should have sold it when you had the chance. Another chimed in. It's your own fault. You had gold standing in your front yard? Now it's vanished into thin air. The old man didn't react. He stood silently, his eyes calm, as if he wasn't surprised at all. Someone asked, "Aren't you angry? Heartbroken?" He simply shrugged. "Maybe it's bad," he said slowly. "Maybe it's not. Who can say?" The villagers were stunned. Was he in denial? Was he just pretending? To them, the truth was obvious. He had lost the most valuable thing he owned. It was a tragedy, plain and simple. But the old man refused to label it, because while everyone else was busy judging the moment, he was waiting to understand the bigger picture. And just 3 days later, that picture changed in a way no one expected. On the third morning before the sun had fully risen, a thundering sound echoed through the valley. It wasn't loud enough to alarm the villagers, but the old man, he knew. He stepped outside, eyes scanning the horizon, and then there it was. His white horse, majestic, calm, walking toward him. But behind it, 3 wild horses, dark and untamed, followed closely. The villagers heard the noise and rushed over. Their mouths dropped open. "This is unbelievable." One of them gasped. "First you lose the horse. Now it comes back with more? This is a miracle." Someone else said, "You're the luckiest man in the whole village." The energy shifted instantly. Where once they'd spoken with pity and judgment, now they spoke with awe and envy. But the old man, he simply ran his hand along the white horses, neck and smiled. "Maybe it's good," he said quietly. "Maybe it's not." The villagers stared at him, confused. How could he say that now? Wasn't this clearly a blessing? But the old man didn't see life in single moments. He had learned that fortune and misfortune often wear the same face, and the truth reveals itself only in time, and soon enough, time would prove him right again. for a few days. The village buzzed with excitement. The old man had gone from fool to legend. People now watched him with admiration, even respect. And his son, a strong-spirited young man, began working with the wild horses, determined to tame them and make them useful for the farm. Everything finally seemed to be turning in their favor. But life doesn't move in straight lines. One afternoon, the villagers heard shouting from the fields. The old man's son had been thrown violently from one of the wild horses. His leg shattered. The injury was serious. He wouldn't walk properly. For months, maybe longer. He certainly couldn't help his father now. Once again, the villagers came rushing in, this time shaking their heads in disbelief. "What terrible luck," someone said. "You've got these horses thinking it was a blessing. Now your only son is crippled," another added. "This is why we don't tempt fate." The old man sat beside his son's bed, holding his hand calm as ever. And again, he whispered the same words, "Maybe it's bad, maybe it's not." The villagers were frustrated now. How could he keep saying that? Wasn't this clearly a tragedy? But the old man understood something they didn't, that every story is still unfolding. What seems like pain today might carry a purpose tomorrow. Weeks passed. The boy's leg remained wrapped and weak. He could barely stand. The once busy household grew quiet. Fewer visitors came now. The villagers had moved on with their lives until one day a sound rolled through the valley that froze every heart. Drums, horns, the distant march of soldiers. War had broken out across the kingdom, and just like that, the peace of the village shattered. Royal messengers arrived on horseback, announcing the king's orders. All able-bodied young men must report for duty, immediately, no exceptions. No time to prepare. One by one, families were torn apart. Sons were kissed goodbye, mothers wept silently, and fathers held back tears as their children were led away with swords in their hands and fear in their eyes. But at the old man's home, soldiers only glanced at his son, then shook their heads. He was of no use to the army, his leg still broken, and just like that, he stayed behind. Now the same villagers who once called him cursed stood in stunned silence. They looked at the old man, their voices softer this time. "You were right," one of them whispered. "If your son hadn't been injured, he'd be marching off to war like the rest." The old man looked up, eyes steady. "Life is always moving," he said, "between joy and sorrow, gain and loss. But not everything is what it seems at first." They nodded, unsure what to say, because in that moment they finally understood what had once looked like misfortune had just saved a life. As the seasons changed and the village slowly adjusted to the absence of its young men, the old man remained the same, calm, grounded, not bitter, not proud, his present. He never said, "I told you so," he never gloated, or sought praise. And when someone asked him how he stayed so peaceful through everything, he simply replied, "Because I don't judge the story by one page." The villagers had spent years reacting, calling things good or bad the moment they happened. But the old man had always waited, watched, trusted. He understood something most people never learn, that life isn't about what happens today. About how today fits into the story of tomorrow. Yes, the horse had vanished. Yes, his son had been injured. But each event, good or bad, was only one piece of a puzzle still unfolding. And isn't that how life really works? Sometimes we lose something, and it feels like the end. Sometimes we're handed pain that makes no sense, and sometimes we only understand years later why it had to happen that way. Because the truth is, what breaks you today might protect you tomorrow. What feels like punishment might be preparation, what you call a curse, might just be the beginning of your greatest blessing in the end. This wasn't a story about a horse, it wasn't about luck, curses, or even survival. It was about something deeper, something most people spend their whole lives chasing, but never truly understand: wisdom. The kind that doesn't come from books, or wealth, or even age, but from stillness. It's from watching life unfold without grabbing at it, judging it, or fearing it. The old man wasn't a prophet. He didn't have special powers or secret knowledge. What he had was rare, the ability to wait, to allow life to speak before jumping to conclusions. Where others saw disaster, he saw possibility. Where others panicked, he paused. And while the village bounced between emotions like a leaf in the wind, he stood like a tree, rooted, unmoved. That's what made him different. Not because he had the answers, but because he had the patience to let the answers reveal themselves. And maybe that's the real takeaway here. You don't need to understand everything right away. You don't need to label every moment good or bad, because the truth is, life doesn't owe you clarity in the middle of the storm. But if you wait long enough, if you trust deep enough, the pieces will fall into place. And one day when you look back, you'll realize that the things you thought were breaking you were actually building you.